Tonight we are privileged to have the editor of the Chicago Catholic with us. Her name is Joyce Duriga, and Joyce, this is the official paper of the Chicago Archdiocese. Joyce is the editor of that paper. She's been that since 2007. She is also the author of 2 books, one on Sister Helen Prejean. Praise God, I said it right. Sister Helen Prejean, who was the sister who used to work in Louisiana with men and women on death row, and she walked with them. And Joyce wrote a book on her. She's also written a book on Augustus Tolton. And I'm going to ask our group here, Grant, Lucy, you guys are on the edge. Would you like to pass these papers out, please, to everybody? Those of you in the 8th grade, you split that up and make sure everybody gets one, okay? Those of you in the 8th grade will find this in your chosen book, and it's on page, well, you'll see what page it's on in the papers that Lucy and Grant are passing out to you. Ironically, the book we're using for confirmation chose Augustus Tolton to tell his story. And so it's something that you want to look at. The book is not very long, and it's a brilliant book of how a slave with no name came into the Catholic Church and how he struggled through racism to become ordained a priest, and how he suffered and died here in the city of Chicago. His cause for canonization. All these other saints we're studying, they've already been through that process. His cause for canonization is going on right now in the Archdiocese of Chicago, and Joyce works very closely with Bishop Perry and moving it forward. It is my privilege to welcome Joyce.
On those sheets, you got just one little disclaimer. You'll see his name is Augustine there. In the materials, we call him Augustus. The canonization cause picked Augustus from the beginning, so I call him Augustus. But I don't want you to get confused when you see Augustine. It's still the same guy. Okay, and we're gonna have a little quiz. I'm gonna try and do. I have to talk loud, so I'm not a loudspeaker. We've got some gift cards and some copies of the book to give you for some quiz stuff throughout, so just to keep you on your toes and see if you're paying attention. So, Father Augustus Tolton. So, I think he would be really interesting for all of us here, or I think he's interesting because he ministered in Chicago, and this is where he died. So down, there's Old St. Mary's down in the Loop, and it's about like a mile west of, you can't really walk the distance, but from Soldier Field. And that was the first church he came in, and then to minister to in the basement. And then also, just to give you some frame of reference, when they did build a church, it was just about west of Sox Park, Guarantee Grapefield. And a little bit of context, out here in Oak Park, when Frank Lloyd Wright was building, his studio over there, Father Tolton was ministering down on the south side, which was in an area called Bronzeville, which some of you might be familiar with. I'm just going to hold this thing. No, because I need this.
Okay, all right.
I apologize. Okay. So, he was born on April 1st, 1854, and he was born into slavery on a plantation in Brush Creek, Missouri. I'll show you a little map in a little bit. And he had a couple siblings. Oh, okay, thank you. He had a couple siblings, and his mother is Martha Tolton. Now, the Tolton last name didn't show up until he was confirmed late in his teens, so we're not quite sure what his last name was or who exactly his father was. But this is the church in Brush Creek where he was baptized. I'll show you that this is the first one burned down, but this is a good reference. We can walk over there eventually too. Now, this birth certificate was made up years later, but because he didn't really have an official one, I'll show you that too. He was just listed in the register as slave of Stephen Elliott. And then that's outside the church. So this, where, if you can see, we can walk down here too. This is where the slaves would have been worshiping in the church. Now, how he ended up Catholic was the slave owners who were Catholic would educate their slaves in the faith, just like the slave owners who were Protestant would educate their slaves in that faith. So his mom wasn't literate. He ended up learning how to read and to write and all that stuff. But his mom was like a particular hero of mine. So this, let's see, this is the, next to that church is, there's actually a slave cemetery which had no markers for a long time. Now they had some wooden crosses, and someone recently replaced them with some stone ones. But then next to it was the white part of the cemetery with monuments like this. This was his slave owner's monument, Stephen Elliott. This is the slave graveyard. This was incredible because I've never been to something like this. And you read about it in history books and stuff, but this is where they don't even know how many people are buried here. It's just super powerful. That's again kind of the long view of the crosses. This is a map. It's going to be hard for everybody to see, but you can walk around with it. So this is where he was born in Brush Creek, Missouri, and then they fled slavery. So what was going on was the slave owner died, so the wife was doing an inventory. Apparently the plantation wasn't doing so well, and they were going to start selling off some slaves. And Tolton's mother found out, and so they started to panic because they would have been divided. They would sell off the kids to somebody else, the mom would go somewhere else. So she ended up, this was about 2 years before the Civil War ended, she fled with her kids. Now the two distances, they ended up in Quincy, Illinois. Now the two distances are, it's from Brush Creek, it's 20 miles on foot through, you would consider it like Midwestern bush, it's like tall grasses, trees, snakes, foxes, all that kind of stuff. On top of it, there's documentation that the slave owner, the wife, hired bounty hunters to chase them down. And at the time, Martha fled with Father Tolton, Augustus Tolton. She had a baby in arms, a young son, and then her daughter. And this is, you figure 20 miles just to get to the Mississippi, and you're still not safe, right? And you're being hunted. Then they get to the Mississippi, and they encounter some soldiers who start firing at them. The Confederate soldiers started firing on them, and then they got some Union soldiers. Oh, I should back up. Well, anyway, this is the plantation. It's still owned by the same family today. So this is the Mississippi where they crossed. We were on a pilgrimage with Cardinal George, who was the previous cardinal to now. It was about a mile across. So, okay, they get to the Mississippi. They're being fired on. You can imagine what's going through Mrs. Tolton's head, right? Like, did they have any food? Did they only travel at night? What was the state of their shoes? Were there blisters? And she's got 3 kids with her. Like, I'm just always amazed by Martha Tolton. And as they cross the Mississippi River, because they're told in Illinois that there's places that they can live free. So she's told to go to Quincy, which is it's another 20 miles. So it's 40 miles total to get home just to be free. So praise Jesus, they do get to Quincy. It's a largely German town. So there was a big black community there. I use the term black instead of African American because when I was doing the book, Bishop Perry, Joseph Perry, who's one of our auxiliaries, helped me out with the book a lot. And I asked him just what he preferred and what we should use, and he said people historically would understand, from his time would understand black more than African Americans. That's why I say that. There's a church down there. Okay, so let me fill in some stuff. So when they get to Quincy, the young kids go to work. He goes to work in a tobacco factory, and Mother Tolton goes to work cleaning houses and doing laundry for folks. We're not sure what his sister Ann did. The younger son died early on. Now when you think about it, Father Tolton wasn't in school, but the school was only for the white people at that time. And so he was working hard. The tobacco factories, it's really hard work because they take the leaves, they dry out the leaves, then they hand roll all of the tobacco, and it gets the tobacco stuff flies everywhere, gets into people's skins, and he had like the lowest rung kind of job. Now, while he's growing up, they do attend when they can the white church, one of the white churches in the community. And then they were befriended by a Father McGurr, who really saw early on in Father Tolton like that he had a vocation to the priesthood. He would come by for Mass in the morning, and he would stop in the church during the day, and just really he saw, and he was an Irish priest, he saw that there was this spirituality there. So he tried to get Father Tolton and Anne into his school. They lasted like a month, because then what happened was the white Catholics in the community who were sending their kids there said, we're going to pull our kids out, we're not going to support the school if you leave these black kids in there. So that didn't last very long. So he would go, when he could, into some sympathetic places. He would get schooling as he was going on. And you can imagine too, this time, you probably learned this stuff in school, but their lives were always under threat. They were never really safe, and they lived the poorest of the poor in these communities. So fast forward, he's finally gets confirmed at 18, has his sacraments and stuff, finally gets through enough religious education to do that. And the Franciscans, they were diocesan priests down in Quincy, but there were also Franciscans who are still down there. Actually, if you've ever been to St. Peter's in the Loop, it's the same community of Franciscans that helped Father Tolton that are still serving downtown today. So this is a picture of Quincy College, which is still down there, which is the Franciscans ran. And so when he graduated, he got graduated from the religious ed and everything, and as high as he could go in schooling, and there was necessarily high school at the time. The Franciscans really wanted to get him into a seminary. So there were about a dozen seminaries in the United States at that time. They wrote to every single one, and each one said no. They said, we're not ready for our Negro priest. So they were frustrated, but they took on the task of getting him ready for seminary. So teaching him Latin, because he would have to know Latin, teaching him different parts of theology. And he already knew German because it was Germantown, so he knew German and English. And so it kind of goes round and round. They're still trying to find a seminary for him to go to. The Franciscans appealed to, every religious community has like a head in Rome. So they appealed to the director in Rome, that's not the right term, but you get the idea, and said, can you help us? So there's a college, it still exists today, it's called Urban College in Rome, that trains missionaries to go out around the world. And so they got Father Tolton into Urban College in Rome. He thought he was going to be a missionary to go serve in Africa. He was one of 2 U.S. students at the time at Urban College. He goes off, he leaves his family, and thinks he's never going to see them again, doesn't quite sure what he's going to experience. Can't really see this well, but she can walk up and down. Right here, you just have to trust me on this, it says Augustus, and then in parentheses, Tolton, slave of Stephen Elliott, April 1st, and then when he was baptized. Oh, that's a letter that he wrote. If you want to show them that. So what made Rome so important, not to, just besides the fact that he was going to be finally ordained a priest, was there wasn't the racism in Rome that there was here. So he was free to go around. He could go to the museums. He could go to the churches. He could go to the worship services. He could go to the restaurants. Because where Italy is, they had been trading with Africa for centuries at that time. What he also learned is down the history of the church, the popes have always said slavery is wrong. No matter what country it was that had slaves, they always were on to the bishops saying, you have to do something to end slavery. This is just not right. So fast forward, after he became a priest, it's the subtitle for my book, it's The Church is the True Liberator. He would speak often when he would go out to raise money, to give talks, that the church was the true liberator for black folks at the time, because it was the only church that truly believed that everybody's equal no matter what color their skin is, how much money they have, whether they're able-bodied or not. So this really had an impact on his life at the time. So what was interesting to me when I was doing this book is, well, a couple of things. There's a couple people I want to tell you about. Okay, these guys. These are the Healy Brothers. So when we describe Father Tolton, we say he's the first identified black priest in the United States. The word identified makes a difference because there were 3 priests, the Healys, who were biracial. So technically, under some ways, they would have been considered the first black priest in the United States, but they never identified as being black. So it was sort of like an open secret. And these guys got prominence in the United States. This one became a bishop, James Healy. Father Sherwood became like the second in command in the Boston Archdiocese. This guy, Patrick, was actually president of Georgetown University when they had slaves on campus. It just blows my mind. Like, and there's writings where he just wouldn't identify with the slaves on campus, but he was also shut out when he would travel the country for maybe fundraising trips or visits or whatever. He wouldn't be allowed in the rectories of certain Jesuit. He became a Jesuit because he was biracial. And one of there's a big, huge building on Georgetown's campus. It's named after him. He was given credit for revitalizing Georgetown University and starting a bunch of the schools. And I mean, it always seems so odd to me. So I've given a couple talks, and someone who was actually Haitian and Cuban, she used a phrase called "they were passing." So apparently they were passing for white, and they have an interesting history. There's a book about them too. Oh, this was my reminder, what I learned about the state of the church and why Father Tolton was sent to America. Okay, so I'll read you this quote. "America has been called the most enlightened nation. We will see if it deserves the honor. If America has never seen a Negro priest, it will see one now." So at the time when Father Tolton was in Urban College, the United States was considered mission territory. So it was under the auspices of this department in the Vatican called the Propaganda Fide, which is propagation of the faith, evangelization of the peoples. So the head of that department was also the head of Urban College. And at the time, the bishops in the United States, Rome kept saying to them, you have to do something to set up a ministry to the enslaved and to the free people in the United States. You have to do this. They didn't do it. They called a council. They were told to do that. They kept just pushing it off. One bishop said, if you make us do this, I'm going to leave the church. One bishop in New Orleans said, I'm doing just fine with my black folks. You don't need to talk to me about this. And then they had another one where they sort of got a little bit further. One of the Healys, the one who was a bishop, was one of 3 bishops named to, we still have it today, it's the collection for the Black and Indian missions. So they set up this annual collection that would go to missions in the United States. So to kind of force the hand of the United States bishops, again, the cardinal who was head of this congregation was also head of Urban College, knew Father Tolton. There's only a class of like 100 and some, Black American. He knew what was going on in the United States. Right before Father Tolton's ordained, he says to him, you're not going to Africa, you're going to the United States, and you're going back to Quincy. I mean, it was like he was a sacrificial lamb. I mean, they said, somebody had to be the first, right? But it was Father Tolton. And I always think about this, like, can you imagine the joy, in one sense, that, you thought you'd never see your family again, and you're going to be able to go home and see all these people and see your town and stuff, but also the panic and the dread and the fear, you know what you're going back to. I mean, he was going back to a racist country, a racist church. I don't say the Catholic Church was racist, but the people that were in the church at the time were definitely, not all, but definitely, bishops had slaves, religious communities had slaves. Georgetown University had slaves. So Father Tolton was set back. And when he came home, there were big celebrations in Quincy. They had hired a train car to go pick him up in Springfield. There were bands playing when he got out. There were processions, white folks and black folks. There were a procession from the train to the church where they gave him a small church where he would minister to. The church was decorated in red and white, which is the colors of Urban College. And the Mass was reported in the local newspapers being like the best Mass ever celebrated in Quincy, and how eloquent Father Tolton was and all that stuff. So, and I mentioned, just hold on to that because I'll get back to that. We could do a quiz, but you probably won't remember because I talk fast, but I'll help you out. Does anybody remember what his mom's name was? Yeah.
Martha?
Yes,
Jesus.
Loretta got you this and one of my books. It's actually a gift card to Starbucks.
Congratulations.
Thank you for listening. And by the way, Martha Tolton is buried in Chicago at Mount Olivet Cemetery on the south side. And next month we're having a mass to celebrate 110th anniversary since she died. And me being the geek that I am, when I got this offer for the book, went down and talked to her and said, would you please bless this person? But, so he comes. All right. So it only took 3 years before things started really going south in Quincy for Father Tolton. I mean, he was, by all the research we have, and it's not a ton, like some saints that you have, there's a lot of writings, there's a lot of documentation on, for people who lived around him, but he was a slave, so he was kind of under the radar, and except when he came back to the United States, because there was a Black Catholic national publication at the time that, I mean, he was front page, like every issue. So, which bothered him too, like he didn't want the notoriety. He just wanted to be a parish priest. But he was the first Black priest in the United States, so, you know, word spread and all these dioceses wanted him to become minister to their people. Parishes across the country were asking him to come speak. He went on occasion to go speak because he needed to raise money for his parish, because he never took a salary when he was in Quincy or when he was in Chicago. Not that he didn't want a salary, but was never given a salary. And I think it's just kind of an oversight. Nobody really wanted to take responsibility for the ministry to Black Catholics. But he was apparently a charismatic speaker. He was a handsome man. He was, he drew people in, and he didn't just draw Black folks in, he drew in white folks. And there would be white and Black altar servers at the altar. There would be white and Black folks worshiping next to each other in the church. And Bishop Perry likes to say he's sort of ahead of his time, because that's what got him into trouble. What happened was the priests in the Diocese of Quincy started to get jealous, and also he was drawing all these people to his church, therefore they were giving donations to his church. And his church was considered a subset of another parish. So through a series of events, that parish got a new pastor. So he says to Father Tolton, white people can't go to your church anymore and you need to give me that money. Yeah. And then the town started, because he opened up a school, so there were white and Black kids coming to a school, and it was mostly the poor white and Black kids, but the town folks were commenting on it. And then the kind of nail in the coffin was, there was a prominent family whose daughter wanted to marry somebody and her parents didn't approve. So the Protestant pastor wouldn't marry him. She went to Father Tolton. He married her. The mom got real upset, gets the whole town on against Father Tolton, and so it really got bad fast. So meanwhile, Father Tolton's writing to Urban College to try and move, because he's being persecuted by a particular German priest that he says in his letters, and really wanted to get out. There are dioceses around the country who wanted him to become a minister. One of them was Chicago. So after a series of unanswered letters, Urban College eventually gets back to him and says, you can go to Chicago, because it's kind of inside baseball Catholic stuff, but their geographical areas called provinces, and Chicago was in the same province as Quincy, so when you're ordained for Urban College, you can go with anywhere in that province. So he said you could go to Chicago. So he comes here in 1889, and this is the old picture. Old St. Mary's doesn't look like that now, but down on the Loop, Old St. Mary's, they had a ministry to the Paulist Fathers. Yeah, Paulist Fathers. They started a ministry to Black Catholics. It was the only one in the diocese, to Black Catholics. They worshipped in the basement. They called themselves the Augustine Society after St. Augustine, like Augustine on your papers. And so Archbishop Thean, who brought him here, said, here, you get all the Black people in Chicago, or Black Catholics, here's your ministry. So they had about 20 committed families when Father Tolton first got there. And it was been reported that 3 months later they had about 250 committed families. So you can see just having the presence of a priest who looks like you, not to mention someone who's charismatic and cares about you and is active. So his goal right from the start was, and his mom came and his sister came. His mom was like his sacristan, which is like the people that help out at Mass and stuff, and like keep the house or whatever. Well, the sacristans don't do that anymore. But so she came here, his sister Anne came here. His goal was to get a parish started. So they named the parish St. Monica, which is the mother of St. Augustine. He's an African saint. He's really interesting. I like him because his whole thing was God was like knocking on his door. He's like, not now. I'm a little busy. I want to just like still party and, do my thing. Not now, Lord. And he had this huge conversion, and he's a big saint. So this is as far as St. Monica got. It was supposed to be like this big church with a couple different floors and stuff, but that's as far as it got before he died. He starts to try and raise money any way he can. There were some white women, Irish white women, who would be giving him some donations, but he also would try and have like parties, craft fairs, our versions of that kind of stuff. Then that's when he also started to go speak around the country. And even that was dangerous for him because these were the time when there were lynchings, when, clearly there was segregation, and there was risk of beatings, there was risks of all kinds of stuff. But he would go because he wanted to build a church for his people here in Chicago. And by all stories that we have, he was a very holy person. Like somebody stayed with him and his mom and said, they had a meager meal for dinner, and then afterwards they all got down on their knees and prayed the rosary. He apparently was spent like hours in the confessional. And when I was doing my research, I found a trip story from the Chicago Tribune about the men who were ministering to the Black community in Chicago. And he got the most words, and they were just gushing about how charismatic he was, how eloquent he was, how his masses were just amazing, and so it would have been neat to meet him. Okay, second quiz. Where did he minister when he first came to Chicago? This should be easy.
Quincy.
Oh, when he first came to Chicago. Your green shirt?
Old St. Mary's. Ding, ding, ding.
Thank you for listening. Okay, so we're getting close to his death. Let me see. Okay, so let me go back to St. Monica's for a minute, because I just want to give you some perspective. Y'all know where Sox Park is?
Yes.
Yes.
So if you get off the expressway and go west, you're going into Bronzeville. It was really close to right there. They tore down a lot of stuff there, but our offices used to be down there, so I don't know how much they developed it, but it's right off, so it's before you get to the police headquarters, there's like this new development and stuff. That's about the area where this church was. Okay, so Father Tolton was ministering to not just Catholics in Bronzeville, and he was given like responsibilities in the Archdiocese. There was an anniversary for Archbishop Thean while he was here, and Father Tolton was in charge of like all the kids' choir. And one of his friends, who was a layman, gave a talk to, it's astonishing that this stuff actually happened, that gave a talk during one of the things of Thean's celebration, that Black people were just as intelligent as white people. I mean, it's astonishing to me that there was a question about it, but there was, it's like, it's really good to know all this stuff, because this is the history of, it's the history of our city, it's the history of our state, it's the history of our country, it's the history of our church, it's just amazing. So, he essentially, in my opinion, worked himself to death. We're not quite sure exactly what he died of. They say consumption, which could have been tuberculosis, it could have been a whole bunch of stuff. We don't have his official death certificate because the coroner's office burned down. It wasn't in the Great Chicago Fire, but it burned down, so we don't have that. We have Martha's, though. He died during a heat wave, this great heat wave in Chicago. There were other people who died. It was, it went on for a couple months. It was in July, and he had gone out to Kankakee for a priest retreat, and he came back. So this is at 35th and Lake Park Avenue. This is where actually this building is, my office used to be there, but it's an Archdiocesan building, but it's right on the lake, like on the other side of this bridge. This is a footbridge that goes over the train tracks to the lake. So he would have gotten off the train here, and then he walked down a couple blocks to here. It's 36th and Ellis, and that's where he collapsed. So he collapsed under a tree, and then some people found him, and Mercy Hospital was not now there anymore. It's officially closed. They took him to Mercy Hospital, and the sisters were ministering to him and stuff, and Martha came, and his sister came. But they couldn't revive him, and then, he died.
Joyce, it's important to remember too that he was walking in a
Yes.
heat wave in his black cassock and his covering over that, and that it was because no one would give him a ride because he was black.
Yeah, well, he was a black neighbor, right? I mean, no one had cards.
Right.
And the other thing to remember too is Bronzeville was poor at the time, and so there was no health care. So people were sick. He was around all the time, all the time. He never gave himself a break. But in my paper, I found a report where he had to take a leave for a couple months because he was just overworking himself. So I really think that, I mean, he was only 43 when he died. Okay, quiz question. What sports stadium is close to where St. Monica is? All right, Laura, how should we do that? That's a good one, they all remember.
I know, I'm very impressed.
Okay, let's go for some table. This,
Soldier Field.
where St. I apologize, I mumbled. Where St. Monica's was.
Oh.
They just were in the playoffs. They didn't get very far.
Oh, with the clock.
There you go. Sorry, I was kind of leading her along.
All right.
Okay, there's one more quiz question. So the neat thing that we found out, okay, this is where Mother Tolton was buried. He wanted to be buried in the priest cemetery down in Quincy. The funny thing about this cemetery is it's like not even, it may be the size of this room down here. It's across the street from an old mall. There's a Starbucks on one side. There's a chicken, Kentucky Fried Chicken on the other. So he's buried down there. We found this out, and I'll show you some pictures if you're up for it later. There's a process called the exhumation where they dig up his remains to verify that it's him. There's a long history in the church on why they do that. But we were there for the covering for his story, and what they found out was he was buried in a glass casket. And that's significant because only at the time, people who were famous or well-respected were buried in glass caskets. So they would have processed around Chicago in Bronzeville and South Loop with his body, and people would have processed there along with going to the church for I don't know if they had wakes back then, and funerals. There were like 40 priests who celebrated his funeral, and then they took the train down to Quincy. Same thing, people picked up the body at up at Quincy and took him there. Oh, this was just, Cardinal George made it personal. Yeah. This is kind of a sore spot for me. So, Cardinal Mundelein, do you all know about Mundelein Seminary? Do you know we have a seminary up at Mundelein? And the town of Mundelein was established by one of our cardinals.
What do we do at a seminary, Joyce?
Men study for the priesthood.
Very good.
Thank you.
All right.
So we have this seminary up in Mundelein, and the whole town of Mundelein was established by Cardinal Mundelein. Cardinal Mundelein was the first big Catholic cardinal in the history of the United States. He was friends with the President of the United States. He was, and there was this is also the interesting history of our church. We're here till what time?
8.
What time is it now? Oh, 7:30.
7:30.
So there was a lot of anti-Catholicism at this time. So he was around 1920s, right? And he fought the anti-Catholicism. One of the reasons why he built Mundelein was to educate American Catholic priests. At the time, there were people said you couldn't be Catholic and American because of the whole connection to the Pope and the popes in Rome. So he's a hero of mine because of that. He really did work for Catholics at the time. There was a lot of immigration from Europe. Immigrants were poor. Catholic immigrants were discriminated against. So but what he did to St. Monica's was just what kind of was an eye-opener for me. It was on the front page of my newspaper at the time. He told the people of St. Monica's the same thing that the priest and the bishop in Quincy told Father Tolton in his church. Whites can't go there anymore. That black people have established themselves enough in prosperous jobs, which wasn't true. And you should be thankful for the religious women who trained the students at the school. And there are 5 churches in the area that white people can go to, and they can't give money there anymore. And yes, I know there's racism, and God doesn't see color, and we'll all be in heaven together. So I kid you not, it was like a 2,000-word letter. And I was like, but I just throw that out there as history. It's part of our history. But I mentioned that to Bishop Perry. If you ever met Bishop Perry, he's one of our auxiliaries. He's our only African-American bishop. He's the head of the Canonization cause. And he said to me, he was a man of the stage, Joyce. I said, okay, I'll just let it go. I'm trying to let it go, but obviously I haven't let it go. It just keeps going.
Can you tell us what it takes to become a saint?
Yes.
And why did they exhume the body?
Yeah, because that's next.
Oh, okay.
And it's kind of good, probably a good thing you can see his body, but anyway. Why did he become a saint? What it takes to be.
What does it take to be a saint?
Well, there has to be a public devotion to the person. And Pope Benedict a few years ago said it can't just be that city or that, it has to kind of be a universal devotion, that there's a recognition of somebody's holiness and faithfulness to God and living out the teachings of the church. What it takes, it's a big long process, it's expensive. They have to officially open a cause. Cardinal George opened up Father Tolton's cause in 2010.
Okay.
And some of these dates get mixed up in my head. Anyway, so then they start all this research. There's these different committees, but they're commissions. One will study like the legal side of things, like church law side of stuff related to him. Some will study his theology, some will study his life. And then they come together, they put together this huge document called a positio, which is essentially a dissertation on the person's life. And I mean, it's huge. It's like, I think ours was like, it was several stacks like that. And so they have to send it to Rome. There's a congregation in Rome that kind of studies all this stuff. So if they recognize that the person had a holy life, they'll name them servant of God. No miracles are needed. It's just a recognition that this person did have a holy life and he's worth, emulating and venerating. So Father Tolton got servant of God. Then they have their own commissions over there who...
Over there where?
Rome.
Okay.
At the Vatican, more specifically, because it's its own country. But they have their own commissions at the Vatican who start investigating deeper. And the next level is you're given the name venerable, which is like you're on your way. There's a ton of servant of gods. People don't get, there's a lot of venerables too. So Father Tolton about 2-3 years ago was elevated to venerable. Next up is blessed and then sainthood. You need a miracle for each to get to be canonized. Now the Pope can waive the second miracle. He's done that, Pope Francis has done that. I think Benedict might have done it for one person. But, so you need a verified medical miracle. They have, independent doctors who verify stuff. I did a story actually. There was a cardinal in England the miracle that he got for canonization was this woman who lived in Chicago at the time who was pregnant. Her uterine? Yeah, wall detached while the baby was in her uterus. And, And long story short, she ended up, there was a rupture, she started bleeding profusely. She would have died or she would have lost her, she should have died or she should have lost her baby. She prayed to this saint, Cardinal Henry Newman, and the bleeding stopped. She gets to the hospital, there's no more tear. Everything had was totally restored to a normal use. She had a baby, had the baby safely. She since had other children. I interviewed her it was a very cool story for the paper. But so these things happen, but they have to be investigated by medical doctors and all kinds of like independent people, all that kind of stuff. And then it's sent to Rome. They have their own medical commission that verifies whether it's legit or not that they feel. And then if it is, then he'll get the blessed status. There are miracles that have gone to Rome. Bishop Perry, he's got at least 2. We haven't heard yet, obviously. Yeah, so God willing. Bishop Perry says so, and I'm pretty convinced too that we'll at least see beatification. And the cool thing too is beatifications happen here. Well, they probably happen in Quincy, but so there's been a beatification in the United States. Father Salamis Casey was a couple years ago.
Right.
So they, okay, so.
We want to talk about the act. Why did they dig up the body? What are they looking for? What do they do with it?
It's a really cool thing, actually. It sounds very morbid, but this was one of the coolest stories I ever did. It was very prayerful, too. So it's a process, because back in the day, in the early days of Christianity, they would rob the graves of the holy people. They would steal the bones so nobody could venerate the holy people. So they would always dig them up and put them somewhere safe. They also do it to verify that it is who it is. And to prepare it for it to be moved to a shrine at a later date. So it's a very neat process. You get a forensic how do you call it? Forensic anthropologist. Yeah, you get like there's a couple scientific folks you have to come and bring, and they went through the process. They digged out the grave. They actually found out that it's so funny. I'm the only one who finds this funny, but when you go to visit his grave, his name is on one side, but he's actually buried on the other side. But
I knew the undertaker that was part of the process.
Did you?
Yes. What's really important that all of you know is the church considers your body so sacred that when they dug up the Augustus Tolton's body, they venerate it. They dress it in an alb and a cassock, these bones. And that's because your church believes that you are created in the image and likeness of God. You are holy. And the church, when they dug up this body, these bones, and they look kind of icky, the bones, they dress in the clerics of the priest. It was beautiful.
You're doing a good job. Oh, well, thanks. Essentially what Loretta said, yeah. So let me see if, so they had to dig down deep. They went down, like I said, it's a really cool process. They went with sonars or whatever they are to find where the caskets were, like the day before. And at the beginning of the process, we were late, we come hauling in with our Starbucks and stuff. They have to take an oath. Everybody who's involved in the process, from the cemetery workers to the anthropologists and the archaeologists that they had there, to the priests who were there. It was a tiny group of people. But so they dug down. So they're getting to the point like they do like CSI, like they're just with their brushes, unearthing the bones. And they were hoping that they would be firm enough that they could wash them, clean them, and then assemble his body back together and then rebury him. But because it was kind of a clay soil, they weren't able, it was just too soft for them to do it. This is when they found that it was a glass casket, because there were these brass handles that have since made it through that time that would have been on the glass casket. Because this is Father Tolton. So what they also do is they reassemble the body. So the anthropologist, they took every little bone, and then he reassembled the skeleton of Father Tolton. And you can identify by certain things that it's a male, and how old was he when he died, and even the race by the skull shape, because we all have different skull shapes. So they laid, piece by piece, they laid him out on a sheet, and then Bishop Perry had got a vestment, a priest vestment, that would have been from similar to that time, and they vested him. And meanwhile, they're praying the rosary, they're singing, the priests on there are singing. I mean, it was like just goosebumps. And then they put the pall over them. They processed with the remains. They reburied him in a new casket. which has his name on it, and they sealed it with wax, because everything in the Vatican process has to be sealed with wax, and then reburied him again during a graveside service. It was super cool. We weren't allowed to take anything. I should have taken some dirt, but I wasn't thinking. So, okay, last quiz question. How many miracles for canonization? Well, who have an identity?
Lucy had one.
Okay,
2.
yes. Well done. Oops, sorry. You did a nice job with this. All right, so that's kind of about it. Let's see. Where's the process now? We're still working. You know, we're still waiting to hear on the miracle. Bishop Perry does talks. I do talks to try to raise money for the cause, because it's super expensive to have somebody canonized. But